So in chapter 2, we're going to move into passive versus active voice. And we introduced these skills within the discussion board, and there were several videos in which we were trying to just get you kind of familiarized with what that meant. And it's really kind of a hard thing to get your head around at first. I hate the definition. It's a noun that has a verb to it, and then therefore it becomes active. And if a noun's really not doing this to the verb, then it's passive. There's much easier ways for us to kind of do that. So I'm going to take some examples of things that we run into every day and kind of dig into those so we can kind of get you understanding active and passive in the environment you're working in. And the first part of this process is understanding the active voice in all communication. So if somebody walked up to you and through the discussion he says to you, "Hey, my boss really wants me to get your electricians on the 3rd floor to finish out your work so we can move the tenant in." Okay, so we know his boss is probably the project manager for the GC, and he's a project engineer just like you are. So, and he's asking you on behalf of this project manager to get your electricians onto the 3rd floor to finish out your work. So is this an active or passive voice? Well, let's go look at it. So in this conversation, is it an active or passive? First, let's look at who the active person is in this conversation. In this case, it is the boss that is the active person. In technical terms, it is the noun followed by the verb. My boss wants. We then see that the passive person in the sentence is the person asking you to do something. And then from there, so we see that the engineer that's asking you that question is acting in a passive way. He's saying, "Hey, my boss wants you to do this." So he's just being, in essence, he's kind of wishy-washying around because he's not telling you to do it. He's saying, "My boss is telling you to do it." And then we can see that you're being asked to become the active person by you sending electricians to the 3rd floor and doing what he wants you to do. So what he's done is he really hasn't said he wants you to do anything. It's his boss wants you to do it. And you're going to have to go do something and become the active person just because he asked you to. So what is really happening is that you're being requested to perform some action that is passively requested by a person whose boss wants something done. So you got to ask yourself the big question. If you perform this action, were you really directed to move your electricians? And that's a big question. Was I given a directive to go do this or not? I mean, my boss, meaning his boss, wants this done, but he's not telling you to do it. So he's not directing you. I don't think the boss is standing there, or he wouldn't be saying that. So the boss isn't directing you. So really, you're not being directed. It's just being kind of suggested in here in a very passive way that you really ought to go do that. So the answer in this case is that if you were passively asked to do something, then it becomes your choice if you decide to do it or not. In the event that this action causes problem upon execution, can you really state that you are directed to perform this change? Well, you could say, yeah, that project engineer told me to go do it. Well, no, he didn't really do that. He asked you to do it on behalf of his boss. He didn't tell you to go do it. He didn't direct you to go do it. And so let's move to the next issue when it comes to money or lost production. When this change costs you money or lost production, are you going to be able to collect for it just because somebody's boss wanted you to do it? So yeah, I mean, that's a real question. I guess if that guy's boss is willing to stand up and say, "Yeah, I told my project engineer to do that," that's fine. But sometimes that doesn't happen. People get selective amnesia very quickly in the industry. And so all of a sudden that project engineer's hung out to dry, and you're hung out to dry really, because the engineer's still going to keep his job, but you're going to lose the money. So when the issue presents itself to compensate you for your assistance, do you think the boss is going to say he directed it? And, maybe. But, if it's a big deal and it's like, oh gosh, I didn't realize this is going to cost me $50,000 to go move these guys up to the third floor. He might just crawfish, and most likely he's going to say, no, I didn't direct you to do that. My project engineer might have asked you to do it, but I didn't tell you to go do it. And, I just felt like you might, maybe my project engineer was just suggesting you do it because it would have made the job go a lot smoother. Either way, you're acting on a passive voice, and there's nothing good that can come of it. So when we see this very simple example, it is that passive communication leads to misunderstanding. If you had been approached and told that someone, meaning the GC, was directing you to move your crew to that third floor, you have an active role established. So if he came to you and said, hey, I'm directing you to move your crews up to the third floor tomorrow so you can finish that tenant work, you'd be okay. But if it's in, that's an active voice. He is asking you to do something. But if he's asking you to do something for somebody else, on behalf of somebody else, he's not directing you, he's just asking you. By conforming to this, to the person who has requested this action, you have established an accurate agreement that was actually directed. So here again, we're trying to get you guys to the point where when you write an email or you receive an email, when you get it, you pay attention to it and say, am I really being told to do this? Or is this just some sort of a passive way to get me to kind of decide I want to go do that on my own? And I've seen directed acceleration this way all the time. And they call it non-directed. They hint around that you need to work a little overtime over here. But they're never going to direct you to do it. So they're going to use that passive voice on you all the way through it. Like, wow, I was talking to so-and-so, and he says, you're really behind on your electrical in that third floor area. Well, that's not coming straight from his mouth, and he's not stating it. He's just passing on and laying the blame to somebody else as to why he's trying to convince you to go up there and work overtime. And by conforming to this person who has requested, we go back to this. You got to have the person requesting the action to establish an accurate agreement that was actively directed. So that's really where we're going here is, we can look at another example. Let's consider a situation with one of your vendors. And they're really good. Vendors are the worst. Because, and I'm going to sidebar for just a minute and take this off before I go into this example. You call up your vendor and you say, hey, I need for you to check on all the switch gear and tell me how I'm doing on these main switchboards. And the guy, writes you an email back and says, I spoke with the factory and they informed me it's on the next slot on the production run. So you're the next guy in. Well, now, did he answer your question? No, he didn't say anything. He's passively telling you that somebody else is telling him this. So when you go into the general contractor and say, yeah, I'm going to have these switchboards on time, you don't know if you really are or not. You have somebody telling you that he talked to somebody else, then you have nothing that gives you any kind of indication that it's really going to happen. Now, if the vendor had come back and says, yes, I have confirmation from the manufacturer and I'll send you a copy of that, then you've got something when you sit down with that owner, you can say, yes, sir, I'm going to have these at this specific time based on this from the manufacturer. If the manufacturer fails to do it, you were still proactive to that owner, and then it's you and the owner both have a common enemy, which is the manufacturer that didn't supply what he said he was going to supply. So, and you see a lot of this in custom light fixture orders, because these things are, the engineer specs a specific fixture that he's buddies with that makes, that somebody of his makes. So you're kind of working through 4 different parties that you don't even know who they are. So, and let's say we have a custom light fixture order that has extremely long lead times as they're being made in Italy. And you're about 1 month from the job finishing, and you still don't have the light fixtures for that outdoor courtyard lighting that's coming from Italy. So in the process of expediting these fixtures over the last 6 months, you've called your vendor numerous times and sent several emails stating your concerns, but you still haven't received any confirmation as to the delivery date for these courtyard fixtures. All you've received is the vendor says, yes, I talked to the manufacturer in Italy and he says this, and they're going to be on holiday next month, but they'll be, as soon as they get out of holiday, your production is going to go in. So you're getting non-answers. You're getting passive answers from the vendors, because the vendors are only passing on what they get told. They're about as passive as you get. And so when a vendor, you need to really watch your vendor correspondence, because they're never going to give you a true answer unless you get it straight from who they're buying that product from. So a lot of times I will make sure that that I don't consider a vendor as a proper person to ask when it's going to ship. I want something directly in writing from the manufacturer. So one of those things you need to pay good attention to. So in this little example, at this point, you're going to need to elevate this problem to a higher level of management to get some response from your vendor before this becomes a major issue to the grand opening of the project. Because let's face it, if you're sitting with a light fixture order from Italy, it better be on the boat if you're going to open that thing up in the next month, and you better have a custom clearance number and what custom clearinghouse it's going for. So you got a big problem here, and you're going to have to inform people because it's an issue related to the grand opening of the project. So what do we do? First, the first thing we do, of course, is establish and understand the problem and then go do the homework, right? So we're going to have to be able to show that we properly handled the submittal process. We got our purchase orders in properly. They were formally released on time. They were approved, the whole shooting match. And what we're really having to do is establish that we, as our company, has done everything by the book, and that the problem lies solely between your vendor and his manufacturer. And it's really the manufacturer that's the problem. It's not the vendor. But then again, you may have a vendor that forgot to send the paperwork to the manufacturer, and it's his problem. You may find that to be true, and I've seen that happen before. So, but nonetheless, you need to be able to establish to your clients that you did everything right, and this is really a problem that lies directly square on the vendor and the manufacturer in this case. So based on our research, we're able to determine you've done everything correctly, and that the problem lies in the lack of communication from your vendor that confirms a delivery day. I mean, after all, if the fixtures are coming from Italy, they better be on the boat, just like I said before. Since you do not have anything from the vendor, despite your numerous attempts to get such response from them, you have little choice but to inform all parties that this is going to affect the grand opening. And those parties are going to include the owner, the GC, the engineer, the vendor, the manufacturer. And you're going to have to state it that this could delay the opening of the project and that this is a big deal. So because of the gravity of the situation, you need to compose a letter which outlines the exact condition of the delay and establishes the parties at fault and the type of remedy required to mitigate the solution or the situation at the lowest possible cost. In other words, you can't walk into that into a meeting or send a letter out and say, guess what, my vendor hasn't been able to give me the right information because he can't get it from the manufacturer, but it's pretty obvious you're not going to be able to get them in time to open the courtyard for your grand gala event. and then you don't give them any to solve the problem. Now that's a big issue right there. So if you were to write a statement that says, after numerous attempts to expedite the delivery of the courtyard fixtures, we have yet to receive from your manufacturer an actual ship date from these fixtures, there you go, and I put some language here in an active voice, and that's what we're really trying to do. Is this letter serves to formally notify you, meaning XYZ vendor, and you would put his name there, that failure to deliver the courtyard fixtures by a certain date will result in a delay of the opening of the project, right? And you've named the project. There, that's as active as you get. Then please be advised that your failure to deliver on time will result in significant additional costs to the owner and all other parties, which will result in a back charge to you for all these costs, which will include all markups and profit. So here again, we've just nailed it as actively as you possibly can. There's not much that's not being stated there. There's not a lot of in-betweens and gray areas in that statement. So, so we've written the letter and we put them on notice, meaning the manufacturer and the vendor, but we still haven't exhibited to our client that we're taking an active role in resolving this issue. What we've done is place the vendor on notice, yet we don't have a workaround plan. So, and we do need to do that. We're going to have to figure out some way to mitigate the impact that this issue is creating. In your letter, this goes back to the active voice and proactivity in your approach towards management. They're both the same. In your letter, you must show some proactive management skills. To this end, there are several ways to mitigate the situation. As this is a very large issue to the entire project, the normal course that you would take would be to request a meeting of all parties immediately, in which you would present a solution or solutions to the problem. And in that meeting, you're going to need to have a handout of some sort that walks through your plan so that you have a concrete plan available to reduce the impact to the lowest level possible that everybody can get their hands on. And so hopefully you figured out a way to do some temporary lighting, and you figured out a way to do some certain things from other fixtures that you may have on other job sites that you haven't installed yet, that you could loan out to the project for a period of a month, and do things like that. Just come up with creative ways to still get the project, the grand opening, done, but it may not be exactly the way you wanted it to. And at that point, the meeting is there because all the other parties are going to have to agree on all these crazy workarounds that you're going to do and see if it really will even work for them. So here again, now we've seen this letter grow into, now you got to have a mitigation plan. You've got to be able to, you're having to write a letter to the vendor and the manufacturer indicating what they're doing. So you've really gotten into a much higher level of communication and types of communication. So now we've got 3 different types of letters, type of written communications, all related to this one issue. So now that you've established your written workaround plan and you've composed your letter to all parties, you must decide what's the best way to deliver this message. And this is just something I'm going to add here. And in this case, an email may not be your best solution. And the reason I say that is emails have a tendency to not have the same urgency that an issue like this would require. So if you float an email in there and you don't make it obvious that this is a big ticket item and everybody drop what you're doing, we got to get on top of this thing. You're kind of slipping it in on them, and you can really anger a general contractor by slipping an email in there that has this huge impact to it and not make it look like it's a big deal. So, when you have a problem, and it is a big problem, you want to elevate it to such a point that, that everybody knows that this has serious ramifications, and it is going to require somebody doing a lot of things in order to mitigate it to where the project's able to open on time. And so, once again, you got to think about that. Normally, what I would do, or most project managers would be, you would write a formal letter, you would copy everybody on it, have it delivered to everybody. So when they get the formal letter, and as part of that formal letter, I'd have the mitigation plan behind it on how you're going to do the workaround to allow that project to open on time, even though they don't have the fixtures they wanted from Italy. And then then you have to deal with the other issue of what in the heck are you going to do with that manufacturer? Do you need to fly to Italy to figure out what's going on, or what? And yes, we've had many a time where we've had to fly to the factory just to see if the guy was lying to us or not. So we can see from these just two simple examples that the active voice plays an important role in all forms of communication. And we can also see that by working in the active voice, your reputation becomes such that you're known for being proactive in your management skills. And that's what people want. They need proactive managers that resolve problems. And as a project engineer, you're learning how to become that manager. So your engineering skills are just allowing you to gain the knowledge necessary for you to then become the manager that can use all of these tools as a normal everyday function of their work. And another byproduct of using the active voice is that you're going to really reduce the amount of misunderstandings that typically happen on a job site. And that's the he said, she said, and no, you didn't really say that, and this and that. And we see this a lot in more inexperienced engineers because they're writing a lot of stuff in passive voice. So you really don't know what the arrangement was from the emails they send out. And that's why the more you stay in the active voice, at least if you're going to have a problem, you're going to know about it fairly soon. And then you can resolve the problem and you don't have to deal with it later in life. And what I see in as professors, we've been through this whole thing and been through the legal side of it, and we'll talk about that more, is that, you want to be able to resolve these issues as time goes on. Not, all of a sudden all these misunderstandings show up a year into the job and there's no way you can collect or mitigate the problems that have occurred. So that's when the attorneys have to come in, and when the attorneys come in, virtually everything is an active voice. He did this and he did that and he did this to that guy, and that's how you have to go collect your money, and it's a miserable way to try and resolve misunderstandings. Whereas if somebody has a misunderstanding and it's in an active voice, they're going to say something about it right then and there. And you're either going to get it fixed or you're going to agree you have a misunderstanding and go work it that way. So that's really an important aspect of where we're going. Remember passive versus active voice. And when you're hanging out with your buddies at lunch and stuff, play around a little bit. Throw around a couple ideas on the table. You may have one issue where you got a vendor that you think's lying to you, and say, how can I squeeze this guy in and force his hand into telling me the truth? And the way you do that is finally get him to put in an active voice what's really going on, because vendors don't do anything. They just turn paper around. So you got to get to the manufacturer that's supporting that vendor and have him put something actively correct or actively telling you what's going to happen, so that you have it in your file that you know that the manufacturer is supposed to be doing a certain thing. You're not taking it secondhand from your vendor. So these are just important things as you get more and more used to dealing with active versus passive, that will become more natural for you.